says you can't go for bold without going broke. Always afford to be you to the max.
Luxury is where you are. Haagen-Dazs Caramel Cone. That's Dazs.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Johnson. I serve on the English faculty here, and I direct Verse Like Water, the visiting poet program of Central Lakes College. And I always start with just a few business notes. Be sure to do the right thing with your mobiles and quiet them down. My dare's going to read for 40 minutes or so, possibly take some questions. And after that, we'll have a book signing and a craft talk here at 1:30. Feel free to grab a copy of her beautiful book, Afterland. They're right down here on the stage with me. And I'd like to let you know, too, that this reading is sponsored by Minnesota Public Radio and Five Wings Arts Council. Verse Like Water, the visiting poet program of Central Lakes College, concludes its 12th year of programming today with a celebration of the work of Hmong poet Vang. And we are so grateful you have journeyed from Fresno, California to inhabit what for us is a mild February day. To get at what I want to say, I return in thought to the poet who began everything here, my friend Lee Young Lee, who believes that all poems are projections. Lee Young writes that to study those projections is to begin to understand the projector, the mind and heart of the creator. When I open up the books of my dare, I see an endlessly talented artist standing up to and recording history with vivid language and visual collage, a writer calling us to pay attention and remember the anguished journey of the great Hmong people who are still suffering the consequences of the CIA's secret war conducted in Laos when I was a teenager. My dare has never heard the sound of bombs exploding, nor has she observed helicopters spraying herbicide over the foothills surrounding Fresno. But her mother and father in 1975 fled those sounds and smells the year before she was born. And they stand with nearly 250,000 Hmong who immigrated to America, largely to California and Minnesota. So for us, her poems are projections, but for the Hmong, they are reflections, apertures which help them understand that while life is beautiful, it can also be terrible. And it is Nigerian-American poet Chris Abani who taught us a year and a half ago that that's just the way it is. It's our human condition. Dr. Abani says that if you want to claim the sublime, you must also take up and witness what is grotesque, because only then do we have the chance for transformation. This chance is suddenly our opportunity, and with my dare's vision, we can glimpse the long story of her people, ancient, indigenous, exiled. And now we arrive at a rule. What's not written down is forgotten, and I assure you that she is not going to let that happen. Join me, and let's offer a warm Minnesota welcome to Vang.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Jeff. Just wonderful. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for being here. I want to first start off by thanking Jeff for inviting me and for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here in Minnesota and Brainerd and to be reading poems for all of you today. So thank you. Yeah, I love this podium, by the way. I feel like I'm on very, it feels like it makes the occasion even more special, so. Okay, so I think I'm going to start off with some poems from Afterland. And Afterland was my first book, came out a few years ago. And it was the book where, you know, I was sort of exploring my Hmong American identity, but I was also retracing the footsteps of my parents. So while I was looking forward at who I was becoming as a Hmong American, I was also looking backwards too, and thinking about my parents who came here as refugees from Laos, following the U.S.'s withdrawal from its wars in Vietnam and Laos. And they resettled as refugees, initially in the Twin Cities, in fact, but then they found their way to California. And I'll get more into that, too, as we go along here. So the first poem I want to read is from Afterland, and it's a poem I wrote for my parents. Dear Exile, if I can find it. Dear Exile, never step back, never a last scent of plumeria. When my parents left, you knew it was for good. It's a herd of horses never to reclaim their steps. You became a moth hanging down from the sun, old river calling to my mother, kept spilling out of her lungs. Ridgeline vista closed into the locket of their gaze. It's the Siberian crane, forbidden to fly back after winter. You marbled my father's face, floated him as stone over the sea, further every minute, emptying his child years to the land. You crawled back in your bomb. It's when the banyan must leave, relearn to cathedral its roots. Okay. So as I was sharing, my parents arrived here as refugees from Laos. And, you know, during those early years, it was tough. It was tough growing up. And I was lucky to live in a multi-generational household. So my grandmother lived with us. My grandfather, when he was alive, also lived with us. And then at one point, my uncle lived with us, too. So we had a very full house. And you know, that's what made every day new and interesting. My grandmother also had this really strange obsession with Sylvester Stallone. So this next poem I'd like to read is a poem reflecting on that really strange obsession. Matriarch. She points at the television as if she could translate Rocky, make sense of Rambo. She is camphor blouse, grandmother, keeper of jars for flamed cuppings. She knows where men have been, those falling into tarnished landscapes, sinew machine built from fire as if coal were burning their insides. Rocky's arms draw skin drip of diamonds in the meat locker. Rambo is carnage cloaked in her homeland mud. She knows them as one. Their howling stare before they yield, the way their eyes turn lunar, rogue as dead stars thrown back to the graveyard in heaven. In the afterwar, there are no more terraces, no more hills, no hand to sweep the hearth, but always there remains a man omitted, and that she knows as well. It's nice to read that one. It's been a while since I've shared that one. Yeah, I think I'd like to read this one too. I grew up in Fresno, and I was sharing with some people a while ago that Fresno, in the summer, we often get triple-digit heat, right? So unlike what you all experience here, we get 110, 112 on our in the height of summer, and we do get snow, but it's sort of further in the outlying foothill areas and in the Sierra Nevadas, which are the mountain, which is the mountain range that sort of looks down and overshadows the valley. And I remember one time, my uncle, the one who was living with us, he came home one day in his flatbed truck with snow in the back. And it was so exciting because it was the first time that we had seen snow as children, and we had no idea. And so every time I come to a landscape with snow, because there's still snow here, and we were actually talking about a sad little pile of snow earlier, Jeff and I. And so there's still snow here. So every time I come to an area with snow, I think about my uncle and that flatbed truck with snow. So I'd like to share this poem, Sojourn with Snow. That day you brought it home. It's like tiny diamonds that turn to water. Taste it. Tastes like ice. Try it. You too once saw how it dropped. A slow searching until it went away. Gone are the warm banana leaves, the vapor rains, evacuee from a rainforest. Hostile frost settled your skinny body. Or maybe that city would start you over. No layers felt enough. We played with this gift every day. Compressed to no more, numbed in our flushed palms, those of refugee children who now believed. Sprinkle more in my pile, my footprint stays. Yeah. Here's another poem I'd like to share about growing up, and like I said, again, growing up in a multi-generational household with many siblings. I was both fortunate but also at a disadvantage to grow up with 7 other siblings. And I just remember that one of my favorite things to do was just to go outside in the backyard and wander around. And we had this backyard that was, that had a driveway attached to it, and it looked out into this lumber yard of all things, right? And so this poem is about that experience of having a lumber yard in your backyard. Beyond the backyard, light passing through geometry of chain link gate, wig of barbed wire, all I might see. We pay our rent to the mechanic next door. He's industry too. Someday I will forgive dirt floor alleys with dumpsters everyone used. Forgive forklifts crawling in the lumberyard. Forgive acoustic winds lashing open the back door. Anchor, let go. I will climb on the ledge to peer over and beggar my eyes to a view. Rusted sedan, wire zip line to stapled roof, retired shopping cart, missing wheel. My parents fled for this. Okay, y'all doing okay so far? Yeah? Yeah, I should also share that I'm going to read some poems, but I would also love to take some questions too after I read. So, okay, let's see. I think I'll do a few more from Afterland, and then I'll move on to Yellow Rain, and then I hope I can share a few new poems too, some new things I've been working on. Let's see here. Okay. I'm going to read I Am the Whole Defense. Jeff and I were talking about this. And this is a poem that is based off of something I found in a historical textbook about a Hmong woman in the mid-1700s back in southwestern China who was able to defend a fort by herself while all of the men had been killed. I am the whole defense. Lightning is the creature who carries a knife. 2 months now, the rains hold watch. Statues bury antique smeared with old egrets' blood. I feel the pulse of this inferno, tested by the hour to know that even torches must not waver. In the garrison, I teach boulders to trickle from the cliff. My fallen grow parchment from their hair. Calligraphy descends from their lips. Infantry attack, but my musket knows. They scale the sides, yet I tear the rocks. I am not wife, but my name is widow. Let them arrive to my ready door, the earth I've already dug. Okay. So this next poem is a poem that I wrote when I was doing some research about the origin of the Hmong written language. So Hmong people are an oral culture, and it wasn't until the 1950s, 60s that we had a writing system that was based off of the Romanized popular alphabet. And so prior to that, anything that needed to be passed down was passed down through storytelling and through sharing verbally with each other. And it happens that while there was this written system developed in the 50s and 60s, there was also another Hmong man, a farmer who was uneducated and illiterate, who some people believe had been receiving these dreams, these visions that the Hmong people would have a writing system of their own one day. And so he started to sort of translate those dreams into an actual written system. And then as the war was beginning to erupt in the area, he was assassinated. And then the writing system survived through some people who are still using it. And so I thought about him in this poem. And there are Hmong words that you're going to hear in this poem. And the translation of those words immediately follows in the next line that I read. Mother of people without script. You swear the twin spirits taught you to write. At night, you climbed the leaves to hear the gods, catch in the throat, hollow breath. Ba is not ba, is not ba. Blossom is not blanket, is not help. Du is not du, is not du. Edge is not sky, is not wet. On sheet of bamboo with indigo branch, tu tzia is not the tzia. To scissor is not the cold. The obsidian mask will make its own sleep. Leave behind the silver your body won't shed. Now you are Niendao, who was once a young farmer scrawling in secret toward the triggering day. When they could take no more, when all that you had was given, you lined your grave with paper. Okay. It's nice to revisit some of these poems. It's kind of like revisiting an old friend, right? You've been through ups and downs with them, and now you get to hear their voice again, yeah? I do want to read one more poem, and yeah. So, again, based off of something I was sharing with Jeff about water, and oceans this time. So coming from California, I have the opportunity to go to the ocean and to sort of just be in the presence of this massive body of water. I know there are lakes here, right? But in California, we have the Pacific Ocean. And a couple of summers ago, I was with my family in the central coast of California, and just out there in the distance, you could see that there was something that had washed up on the shore, and you couldn't tell what it was, but it was just like this, it looked this big from far away. And so, as we walked closer and closer to this object, this thing, we realized it was a whale that had washed up. And you don't think about how big whales are until you're actually right next to one. And in this case, a devastating one, one that had washed up and had beached. And it was very sad. And so I think about that whale a lot when I think about just the world, our environment, the oceans. This poem is for that whale. Gray vestige. From half a mile, I thought you were some crust of kelp and drift. I never could have guessed it was the last lying down of you, submitting to wreckage on this side of the wind. Dear humpback, this land is too dry to carry you further. Soon you will be taken, your salty oils fragment a sea-frosted spine. Take every sinew adrift where barnacles splayed pectoral fins, your mammal tissue putrefied into aquatic skin. Long ago, you were the arched door into the ocean, having built an orchestra for your own kind of flight. Some things return, but never really do. Like the sifting ground, the scattered baleen, and this, your body ancient, turned upside down. Yeah, I'm gonna move on to Yellow Rain. So Yellow Rain was quite the experience for me. There's a big difference. It's a much thicker book, first of all, so a lot more work and poems went into this collection. But it definitely was and is work that continues to haunt me, and that I continue to have questions about. Even after the book has been published and even after it's been sent out into the world, you'll still look back on things and you'll just continue to ask yourself, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Why, right? And so a little bit of context on Yellow Rain. Yellow Rain was a chemical biological weapon that was used against Hmong refugees when they fled the jungles and when they fled Laos after the US's withdrawal from those wars. And what happened was that a lot of Hmong refugees who were running through the jungles, they reported that there was this substance that would fall from planes, and it would land on their clothes, on their skin, and on the trees and the water and the vegetation around them, and it made them sick. And some people even died from it too, so there were fatalities reported. And so what happened was the United States heard about this thing, and they really wanted to get to the bottom of it. We got to figure out what Yellow Rain is. What is this substance that is killing refugees? And so the United States did conduct an investigation. It was a very long and confusing investigation. And they came to the conclusion, because this was all happening during the Cold War era, they came to the conclusion that it must be the Soviets. And that is who they blamed for Yellow Rain. They said that the Soviets had been giving this toxic substance to the communists in North Vietnam to then use against Hmong refugees. And so as they do their investigation, it just gets so just muddled and frenetic and frenzied with all these different people involved. The media got involved. This was a big thing apparently during the late 70s and early 80s, the media got involved. It was all, in newspaper headlines. There were academic scientists too throughout the country testing these little samples that they were getting from Laos. And then, of course, there were many different politicians involved. So with so many people involved, everyone had a very keen interest to say what they wanted out of it. There were political agendas, and there was one contingency of people who said, it's got to be a chemical weapon, and this is killing these refugees. So there were people who believed that very strongly in the government. But they had an agenda, unfortunately, as happens, right? They wanted to, many of them wanted to exploit the Hmong stories of Yellow Rain to then lobby Congress for more money for defense. So meaning using this story of Yellow Rain to then get more money to pay for guns, bombs, and weapons. And then there were other people involved in this whole fiasco of Yellow Rain who believed it did not happen and who said the Hmong people lied about it. And they had their own agenda too. They were trying to, de-escalate the conflict, which is fair, but, at the expense of these people dying in the jungles, though. So it was like, shush, let's keep quiet about it, type of thing. And in the middle, you had these refugees who were dying from it, and then the Hmong story got shoved into the background. So that's a very long sort of contextual history, but all of that to say that when I was writing this book, I was really trying to kind of do my own investigation, to attempt to reinvestigate it and to challenge the dismissing of these allegations, So I did a lot of research. I went to government archives. I dug through declassified archives. I used the CIA's website a lot, and you can certainly do that. You can certainly pull records from their website because they're required to provide that. And then I wrote this book. So I'm going to start off by reading the first poem in the book, Guide for the Channeling. Toward a worn legacy of rain, I have been lost down every jungle path, adrift and senseless to split open a cascade of knowing. I have tried with all my limber to keen a credo of justice, shelter those who solace inside graves. I have been boiled in my bladed search, opening with questions of a deserted pain to end with the cemented breath shattered into silk. This is where I am taking you. Into a discarded vista blowing forth a silent blaze. Here in sunk villages of the disregarded. Here where even the dirt of the land cannot muster against the threat of air. Biomedical, vegetation, munitions unfound, every footprint incarnate. Where highlands tangle their echoes to the ground, a place, no matter how remote, will always be too near and too much a reminder of an expired war. Refugees not called as people only to be called the outcome of an event. We are venturing into swell beyond swelling of paperwork and protocol, slips of memo and routing cable and classified meeting. Here's the talk. Biological weapon, yellow spots, apiary blame for decades to wane and cold-filed. Believe me as a torch of this wandering that I have been digging in the origins of redaction. Believe where I am sending you. I have been shoveling upside down, and now my eyes stagger, my hands ache, my legs becoming hunter, my back a raging shadow. I have been gardening myself into this remembrance. I think I'll do maybe one or two more from this book, and then I'll close with some new poems. Yeah, one of the things I was sharing is that academic scientists were testing these samples, And the really unfortunate thing is that by the time they arrived to the United States, they had already degraded. So it was kind of a futile effort either way. And so this next poem is about the difficulties of transporting these samples to try to figure out what this was, and the toll that took also on a lot of Hmong refugees who had to, offer these samples which included things like urine, blood, their clothing, and other sort of bodily fluids, right? Authorization to depart ravaged homeland as biomedical sample. Flew you afar, piecemealed bits of spleen, liver, tissues of the second gut, orphaned by the whole. Routed you in a vacuutainer, Bangkok, Frankfurt delayed, Dulles, Fort Detrick. As if only born to serve in post-mortem, detain offerings of cerebral shards to be juried under a lens, flew you from the silken wilderness of your viscera. From all the vacated leftovers of yourself, sinews snipped, culled from the ribs, in this mission of guilt for your unleaving. You've trekked far from the village. Salvaged insides from you and other hundreds, sealed on letterhead, dispersed to the globe. Here, at long last, in these United States, you did not land a body, only as a vial of blood. Were you registered as urine? Did they label you asylum? Sample M3582, victim 7 en route to London. Fluids of you granted fare to enter refugee airspace while ending away in hospital camp, stayed behind the sourced you and every else part. Sample M2582, victim 9, no weekend courier, ambiguously arriving. So stomach of laments, how could they not get you here somehow? Only drops relayed lab to lab to lab. Cargo of you quaking inside an ice chest. Okay. So the last poem I want to share with all of you from Yellow Rain. So one of the things I was mentioning a while ago is that there was a group of people who believed that Hmong people had lied about Yellow Rain. And so the premise that they came up with was that it wasn't a chemical weapon, but it was in fact, in their opinion, the feces of honeybees pooping on Hmong refugees as they ran through the jungles. That was the argument. And that, sadly, is the theory that still stands today. So I wrote this poem in defense of the bees. Well, why are we blaming the bees? Yeah. And there's a ladybug trailing slowly across my podium. It's a beautiful sign. And this poem also opens with an epigraph that's a letter to the editor, so I'll read that too. Allied with the bees. These people have been living in these areas for all their life, but they have never heard or experienced something like this before. Bees and honey are part of their life. They and their ancestors have traded honey for salt, clothes, and other goods for hundreds of years. Letter to the editor by S. Yang, Long Beach, April 6, 1984. Tell them, child, we have hiked these hills without shoes long enough to hunt alongside the bees, memorizing the bend, pulse of their voices when they go dream inside the trees. We have been crowned with syrup of their toils so that our syntax might awaken to know its full range, compassed to the north, pristine as a nomadic butterfly. Tell them, daughter, we watched as they buried their queen, folding her into cashmere of her wings before swarming the body toward a fire of stars. And for days, the forest keened a shadow lullaby, and for nights, we listened for the bees, only to uncover the hurried hush of our own stranded feet, falling forgotten as collateral beings. Tell them, Mintai, we are not misled in our anguish. What happened to the bees also happened to us. Okay, moving on from Yellow Rain. You all hanging in there so far? Okay, so I think I'm going to do maybe just one or two of these newer pieces. And these are poems that I've been working on over the last few years after Yellow Rain. And these poems are still sort of in conversation, I think, with these two books, but they're my attempt to try and sort of branch out and do something differently. And many of these poems focus on a critically endangered animal called the saula. And the saula was recently discovered, recent, 1990s, 1992. And it was a very profound zoological discovery because it was, here had been this large animal living in the mountains, the Annamite mountains of Laos and Vietnam that no one had even known about. And it's an animal that it looks like an antelope, but it's not an antelope. It does have two long horns. It's actually a relative of wild cattle. And so it's critically endangered in the sense that there are only, I guess the results, the numbers are that there are less than 100 still alive. And so a lot of these poems in this new collection are devoted to this animal. So that's where my collection is going now. It's going to animals. And so this poem I want to read is a poem for the saula. Death in captivity, a surrender. An animal searches for its homeland. Say to the animal, here is your home. Here is your livelihood, here in this fenced perimeter. Say to the animal, you are the last of your kind. That is why you must live. An animal migrates into a new body, senses the impulse to leave. Say to the animal, heavy is an apology inside the wind. Say to the animal, mortality anchors us to this planet. An animal dies searching for its birthland. Say to the animal, may your steps serve as an itinerary of your past. Say to the animal, may you come back as a body of water. May you come back as a saula. All captured saulas have died in captivity, with the exception of 2 released back into the forest. Say to the saula, forgive us in our plea to love you. Forgive that you give us meaning. Say to the saula, to die in captivity swells your mystery. God sworn to never reveal the beauty inside. A saula dies in captivity, each breath falling back in time. Say to the saula, your livelihood is outside. Your bordered topography is a country that may never return. A saula is wounded in the act of capture. A saula grows ill in captivity. A saula dies and takes this future with it. Say to the saula, here is a basket in which to gather snowlight. Here is a blanket made of prayer. Say to the saula, here is an echo of the human you've left behind. Okay, and I think I'll do one more poem on the saula. This is an animal that for me has also been a window into thinking about this landscape of my parents, this, for me, this what feels like a haunted landscape. And yet I think about how this war-torn landscape is also a refuge and sanctuary for this animal. And that to me is the sort of impetus behind many of these poems. So this next poem is called I Arrived to Saula by Way of War.
I leave the midnight to find your beginning by way of a village weathering into ruin, by means of men coerced into combat, by way of an empire shepherding the work of death. I am here in California, and you are there in the Annamites. I seek you by way of retreat, refugees fleeing a line of fire by way of shattered twilight. High grasses hide limbs near a cavernous sigh in the ground by way of bombs encroaching on a footstep. I reach the return of a people plunged into warfare by way of proxy grab, by means of American weapons flowing colonizer veins. I ask you by way of foreshadows. Damage to your life is eventual damage to mine. The torn sky in yours will rupture the bedrock in mine. I walk the hours inside my arms to swaddle questions by way of despair. How does an evacuee? What of continents apart? How do politicians away wear alongside allies when poaching and abandonment? In you, a war I never encountered so much but to be cursed. You bring me to stone dreams of Hmong, wandering foothills outside Fresno, pursuing a mountain from an omitted past. In you, cognizance of exile, shrapnel from an American war. In you, a sequestered landscape floating in a world submerged by water, by means of every human in the conclusion of our days. Something in you fallen, diaphanous, something in you departed and stolen. Okay, thank you so much for your attention to these poems, old and new. So I think we have time for a few questions, yeah? If there are any curiosities or confessions anyone wants to make. Yes?
Can you describe the way language was used in your household growing up?
Yeah, so the question is how language was used in my household growing up. So I grew up in a household where, of course, my parents and my grandparents, they only spoke Hmong. And that was the language I heard growing up. It wasn't until, of course, I attended grade school that I began to learn English. And for me, it was used in just everyday discussion, everyday activity. There have also been times where I have heard my father singing in Hmong too. And even though he doesn't admit to being a poet himself, so I've heard it in that way as well. I've heard it in ways that is used to celebrate joy and the arrival of my younger siblings, and I've heard it used in ritual to honor the ancestors, and I've also heard it used in mourning to conduct rituals. And what's interesting about that, and I appreciate you asking this question, is that one of the things that I've been doing in my poems, and I didn't realize I was doing this, but because the Hmong language is very tonal, and when you switch one tone, you change the word completely. And also, Hmong words are monosyllabic, so you can infuse a whole world of thought and idea into one syllable, right? And so, when I wrote a lot of the poems for Afterland, I found myself naturally drawn to monosyllabic words because just the way they sounded, the cadence, the rhythm, the da 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 da, and I also appreciated ending poems on a monosyllable, and then I realized it's maybe because I grew up in a household where I heard the Hmong words and the beats of those words. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. I hope that answered it. Yeah. I saw a few other hands. Yeah.
How do you know when you're writing a poem? How do you know when it's done or done enough?
Okay, another really good question about craft here. So I think, I can't remember who said this, but someone said, and this is a poet, someone said, you never finish a poem, you just abandon it. Because you, like I said, you kind of come back and you revisit these old friends and you say hello again, and we've been through a lot, and how are you doing? And so it's, I sometimes get to points too where I come back to some of these old poems and I want to change, very minor things, maybe a comma, maybe a word choice. I try not to overdo it, but I have had those moments too. But I think that's the thing about it, is that it can be hard to sort of stop writing and revising, but you just have to do it. You have to stop at some point.
Do you have a feeling?
Yeah, sometimes the feeling comes with the sound. Funny enough, sometimes I can hear the lines before they're written, and I can feel when the beats will end, and that's when I feel at peace with where I've come to in the poem. Sometimes also it's okay to leave the poems open if they're not entirely closed up at the end. That can also work to a poem's favor. Yeah. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, over here.
Do you have any specific writing routines?
Oh, writing routines. Gosh. Well, I don't have any specific routines, but I do need a comfortable space to write. I need to have maybe something to drink, like coffee or tea. And I find that I've been writing mostly while alone. I know there are poets, for example, my partner is also a poet, and he can write with all kinds of noise in the background. He can write with the TV on, the radio on, and then also a podcast playing, And so for me, I have found myself retreating into these very quiet spaces to be able to write. So I guess I kind of need that environment as well. I also really like to write at night. I find that there's something about just the nighttime, and maybe it's the sort of this protection of the dark that I feel to really go into the difficulties of some of these poems that allows me then to go there. But then also coming out of that space is really important too, coming back into the sunlight and into the new day. So I guess those are a few things. Yeah, I don't have any strange rituals. I know poets who do really strange things, like they have to wear a certain scarf or use a certain pen. I wish I had something more unique to say to that. But yeah. Other question? Yeah.
What made you want to be a poet in the first place?
I guess I didn't know I would become a poet, and it just kind of happens. Maybe by accident, maybe intentionally. But I started writing when I was young, probably when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I've been sharing with some of the folks before this too that most of those poems that I wrote were really, really cheesy poems. Like I wrote, "Roses are red, violets are blue. You're my friend, and I love you." That was the extent of my literary merit. But that's what got me started. I had to start somewhere, and then from there, I began to discover poets. I loved going to libraries, and I had an amazing English teacher. So props to those who teach English. Right? I had an amazing high school English teacher who allowed me to enter the space of the poem without feeling intimidated, without feeling like it wasn't a space for me, but it was a space for me. But she helped me feel comfortable in the language and in the words. And so from that moment on, I was just stuck on poetry. I was convinced that I wanted to write and I wanted to study literature for the rest of my life, just because I felt like I could belong there. It was a welcoming space for me. And I know that not everyone has that experience, and I think it's even more harder for me because I came from a background where English isn't my first language. But this teacher had something special and allowed me to feel safe in poetry and in literature. And so that's what got me started in poetry, and then I eventually followed that path through my undergraduate studies, where I did major in English, and then eventually get my MFA in poetry. So I'm glad I'm here. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, writer's block. This is a great question. So, lots of things you can do. Take a walk, go outside, get some fresh air. First thing, right? Eat something, that can help. Or step away from the work. I've done that too. I just kind of leave it. I say I got to get away from it. It's kind of like someone you have to the poem becomes a thing that you have to collaborate with. It becomes another thing, and you're like, okay, we need time apart. It's a complicated relationship, right? So being able to do that is a good thing. The other thing that I like to do when I'm feeling stuck in my writing is I like to do this thing where I go and I search for words. I will usually, I go to thrift stores and I buy all those bargain books. Reference books like cookbooks, gardening books, photography books, astronomy books. I buy any of those kinds of books where it's not inside my discipline or not in my wheelhouse to know this particular language. And when I'm trying to sort of figure out a poem and I'm stuck, I will open these books and I will just try to learn and scan for new words. Words that are not normally what I would use, and words that are not normally what I would encounter in the books that I normally read. And so I spend time doing that because it's a fun thing to do that still helps me be productive with my writing, but doesn't force me to write. So I just go and I look for words and I collect words. And I type them up all in a document, and then I say, I'm going to use these words one day in my poems. And so it can be words, just I've come across some really cool words in that process. I go back geology words, astronomy, astrology, everything, right? So yeah, I hope that helps for thinking through. So Jeff, I think we're short. Okay, great. Thank you again so much, everyone.
Hey, I left out a thank you. Verse Like Water has a friendly agreement with Grey Wolf Press down in the Twin Towns. And every time we host a Grey Wolf poet, Jeff Schatz and crew dispatch books as a donation, and there are plenty of copies. Please come up and grab one. And if you have a friend who you think might enjoy a book of poetry, it's the most wonderful gift in the world. Take two, they're small. Come on up, they're right down here. Thanks for coming. Okay, book signing now, and then we'll have a craft talk here at 1:30.